everyone. Welcome to the Road Trip Show. Today we are with Jamie Bernard, and she has great amount of experience in product management, starting as a business analyst, and now leading different product teams. And thank you, Jamie, for accepting our invitation to this show and making adding your colors into this episode.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Before diving deeper in the questions, I would be very happy if you can introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Of course. My name's Jamie Bernard. Like you said, I am a senior product director. I've been in product management in some way, shape, or form for over 20 years now. I like to say I have spent time working in the system, so delivering software products, shipping good software, and also on the system in terms of implementing product management organizations inside companies, tearing them down, re-implementing them, building out the interaction and operations model and that sort of thing. And I've done so in giant companies and in small ones. So I sort of have a broad swath of experience doing product management work. Spent a ton of time in the healthcare sector, but one of the things that I've noticed even as I go into auto manufacturing or gem grading or retail or anything in between is that solving customer problems and being customer centric is pretty much a universal need regardless of domain. So it's a space where I've spent a ton of time. I grew up through the business analysis track, so being problem oriented and really curious has just been the thread that's kind of tied me through everything. So I'm very happy to be here. I absolutely love talking about product. I like sharing product knowledge and mentoring others, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
Great, great. I see there are lots of, diverse experiences in different sectors that you have. So I'm really curious about those. So I will get started with the first question. So can you describe your approach to setting strategy and vision for the product management practice or and your other companies, especially in environments undergoing significant change or transformation? How to set these strategies clearly.
So, what I like to do is understand the journey. So, and it depends on where I am in the portfolio stack as far
Mhm.
as what type of strategy we're focusing on. So, when I talk about the journey, you can do that at the macro level. So, even for the company, there are things that you're doing for customers or for constituents that you should understand that the start and the end and the support and everything in between. That is where I like to really focus is what is that journey? What are the capabilities that we have in place that are addressing problems for that user along the journey? Where are we doing well and where are we doing poorly? What is the market like? And what are some particular segments that we are or are not effective inside? Those are kind of the basic that if I don't have that information along with metrics along the way, that's one of the first things I'm going to go after and try to get in place because I feel like a lot of times, especially in older companies where product management might be seen more as a delivery service versus actually doing research and solving problems and experimenting and things like that. I feel like setting that groundwork allows you to have a conversation with somebody who might have deep domain expertise on the business side, but maybe not enough around how to stay close to a changing market and that sort of thing. So, what I like to do is get that groundwork laid first and start to think about what are our strategic goals? Where are we today? And how can we bridge that gap? How can we kind of navigate through what are some what are some bets that we can make and experiments to do so that we can start to really lean in on, is this a segment that we can play in or not? Is this a new type of offering that we can put in or not? And then as part of that, of course, we have to see how the competition is doing. How are they doing along their journey? Where is the addressable market that we might be either trying to capture because there isn't a dominant player, or are we trying to go head to head with somebody, in which case we need to deeply understand what they're doing as well. So aligning all of those foundational elements to the company strategy and goals, drawing a causal link along the way to make sure that we can at least tell that story to say we're investing here because we believe we're going to see an outcome in whatever direction. To
Mhm.
me, that's one of the keys to having strategy, and it allows you to have meaningful conversations with your stakeholders so that you can interrogate that strategy, on some type of cadence.
Yeah, that makes total sense. But I have like just sparked my curiosity out of my questions prepared. Actually, like you mentioned that you need to tell the story to why you're making that product decision, why you created this strategy to create these changes in the organization. So how do you communicate with other stakeholders? Because like as companies grow and get larger in employee sizes, it becomes harder for them to communicate and tell these stories and align around those objectives. So how what would you recommend product leaders to communicate these objectives, product strategies, to make it more clear and understandable for their stakeholders?
I think sometimes there's this notion of I have to keep everything close, or I have to keep everything behind a SharePoint site that requires permission, and that sort of thing, right? So I think transparency is one of the things that more product leaders should put into place and lean into product ops. And what I mean by that is if I have a place where I can send people to say, if you're ever curious about what we have in flight, just click over here and go and read up on our easily digestible, or watch 2 or 3 minute videos on our easily digestible explanation on what it is not only that we have in process that we're keeping the lights on and serving our customers with, but
Mhm.
also what we have in flight. And so what that requires is appropriate implementation of tooling. It requires that your product organization, as you cascade down through the stack, that
Mhm.
product managers really take ownership of the product or capability, depending on the size. Uh, really take ownership of making sure that those feature logs and feature descriptors and that sort of thing, that that's kept up. And then there's linkage to technical documentation or linkage to trainings, or what have you, right? So really making sure that that foundation is set so that you don't always have to get on the phone, and walk people through the same thing by pulling up a PowerPoint deck every time. So I think that there's a lot of value in investing the time and energy into right sizing the documentation that you have out available for your company to look at. And then you can put your strategy out there. This is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to solve for. And that's the foundation through which you can have, quarterly meetings or ask me anythings, or, ways to ground in here's what's going on, so that you don't spend all of your time reporting the news. You can actually say the news is out there for you to read. Let's get
Mhm.
together and talk about some specifics about what it is that we're doing. So I really challenge product leaders to invest in that infrastructure, whether it means rolling up your own sleeves and starting to frame it out and then delegating ownership, or delegating the ownership out of the chute and really challenging one of your leaders that you're growing to take ownership and deliver that as part of being a product person in your organization. I think that sets a good foundation in two ways, not just in the practical and the tactical, by having the information available to folks in a transparent way, but it also ensures that some ways of working and practices stay sticky as you experience transition and turnover in your organization. The information stays there. Of course, you're going to lose domain knowledge,
Mhm.
but at least you have some stuff there that isn't just only living in somebody's head or in some PowerPoint or Word doc or Excel spreadsheet buried somewhere. And
Mhm.
so, what I like to do is make sure that that foundation is set, that there are ways of working and ownership incentives for the product folks to be able to maintain that, so that as you have a release or as you're shipping something that has a material impact to your stakeholders, that that information is available while it's going, and then once you're working with your OCM folks or whoever you are to operationalize things, that information is easily available. The other thing is yes, of course you have to have some meetings, even though like some meetings definitely could be emails or what have you. I feel like that foundation then enables you to have very crisp and focused meetings around, hey, we're going to give you an update of where we are with our roadmap, and you can, report the highlights and really focus on the actions and key takeaways. And if you need to double click in anything, you certainly can. So I have found that having that information be available to folks tends to head off some things at the pass. And then when you have escalations, you now have a foundation and a backstop up against which you can say, listen, this is the plan that we're moving towards. This is the data that's driving us. This is why we're doing the things that we're doing. And if there needs to be a course correction or pivot, you can look ahead and change the direction versus being super disruptive to your teams who are working on the things that are important for now, and you can start to plan for next.
As product leaders, we need to always adapt to, rapid changes in the market. So, although we have those, crisp and clear product strategies, we need to adapt also and balance short-term product goals with long-term strategic planning. So, how do you maintain or make sure that you have the right balance?
So I like to deal with kind of a three horizons approach where if I were to look at a backlog at any point in time, the ideal situation is 85% of that backlog is working on now. These are things that we fleshed out. They're short term important, and by short term I mean 6 8 weeks,
Mhm.
um, or 0 to 8 weeks rather, depending on the size of the org. Next, so that might be the next quarter, the next 2 quarters, whatever. That next should be about 10%. And then the last 5% should be later. What are some experiments that we're running that might inform how we pivot our strategy? What are some things that we want to try that when we fail, we can really talk about what we learned so that we can prevent ourselves from over investing in a bad idea? So I try to take that kind of lens and put it over whatever it is that we're doing. And then you have to have data. You have to have metrics in place that you can not just measure the lagging part, right? You don't want to find out at the end of the year or the end of the month that you're not hitting the goals or that you're not getting the outcomes that you thought that you might get. But you need to also have a metrics network so that you have your leading indicators and your lagging indicators that are signaling success or failure so that you can watch those signals and potentially pivot where necessary. So,
Mhm.
what I like to do is overlay that three horizons, look at my metrics, and then look at the overarching company strategy. And then look at the market. What's the market doing? I think people spend a lot of time so focused looking through the lens of their world because that's just human nature. But take a moment and look at how the market is behaving. What are the trends that are important to your industry, and how would you fare, how are you faring based on those trends and the things that you're measuring? So I think those three key things are important to be able to set up the ability or to create the conditions to pivot. I think a lot of companies make the mistake of they have their AOP process, which drives me bananas, but I know that it's important for every CFO out there. But AOP often causes you to think in year increments. And if you're in a market that's getting disrupted, a year is far too late. So I feel like there's an opportunity there to really get some data, make sure that you have your backlog balanced out such that you are investing in next and later and not just now. And then also measuring not just your product, not just your company, but how the market's doing, and start to interrogate that to see what are some pivots that we might need to make or might need to get in front of.
Actually, like when I look at your previous experience, the most common word that I saw there was pivot, and most of the time, as product leaders, we skip that part, like pivoting, because like we sometimes so hyper focused on product strategy and making this successful. These pivots, maybe we are skipping how important these pivots are. So I actually have a question regarding these pivots. So, do you have an example from one of the products that you worked for that you pivoted to adapt the critical change in the market, and what was the impact on your team maybe because of this pivot, and or at the end of the day, what were the outcomes of this pivot?
So I've spent a lot of time in the healthcare sector, and what we've had to do is more often than not, the pivot comes from regulation or from some type of breakthrough. And, you know, obviously everybody made a huge pivot during COVID. Um, and so part of what we were doing at that point in time is we were dealing with the implementation of new diagnoses, new procedures that had to do with COVID. That completely upset our entire plans, right? Just like it did with the world. So that was an instance where it wasn't just about getting people remote. It wasn't just about making changes in our ways of working, but we truly had to change how we processed and paid for specific claims, for specific procedures, and how we interacted with the government. And so what we had to do is really just slam on the brakes and look at what are the outcomes that we're working on now. What do we have to ingest and deal with based on this massive change that has just changed the world, but not just in that way, but it now is changing how we have to interact with claims that are coming in, how we have to interact with hospitals that are submitting these things. And what we were able to do was really just stack rank and prioritize the stuff that we had in flight, and we took the things at the bottom and said that has to wait, and we refocused on what we had to deal with. So that was really a reactionary type of situation that I think people who are getting disrupted are going to find themselves in when they're getting these metrics and these indicators from the marketplace. That's one of the things that I would recommend doing is you look at what you're doing today if you're in a reactionary seat, and you need to put the bias on the table and say, listen, this is what we're trying to confirm. So, of course, we have some confirmation bias, but the reality is that we have somebody coming up who's nipping at our heels, and we might need to think about deprioritizing some of our least impactful efforts and refocus on how might we play in this other space. So that was kind of in an emergency reactionary situation. One of the clients that I was advising in a space that was more of an ERP, so like an enterprise resource platform. Part of what they were looking at is they were kind of disrupting themselves. How might we integrate this? I'm trying to not violate any NDAs here. How do we integrate this piece of equipment that we have invented that might automate certain steps, but also reorder the steps? And so, what we had to deal with is kind of thinking about, okay, let's look at what the outcome of this specific invention that they were implementing, what problems was it solving? And then we did exactly what I started talking about at the beginning. We looked at our customer journey, or in this case, it was the ERP journey. How was that work flowing through the system in the value stream? Where did we need to make changes? So then we talked about the future flow, where we were integrating this specific invention and making sure that we were still able to do the work necessary. And then we focused on optimization. That was a pivot that we had to make because we weren't sure when this piece of equipment was going to be ready. So part of what we were doing is going kind of status quo, keeping the lights on, making sure that we were delivering the software that we were being requested. And then once we found out that it was approved, that this piece of equipment needed to be implemented, at that point we had to reorganize around what it is we were looking to achieve in terms of outcomes. The big thing that we learned is make sure that you have your OCM and your training folks at the table as early as possible, because that it caused some panic in the organization that we had to navigate through. It caused some training concerns, so they saw a dip in productivity before they saw it go back up. So so those were kind of two examples, one that was based on a reaction, and then one that was based on we knew this thing was coming, so we had an idea of how we were going to deal with it, but once it was ready, then we dug our heels in, got a tactical plan to deal with the pivot, and made the change.
Yeah, they were great examples. Actually, they reminded me Brian Chesky's story when when COVID hit, what happened to Airbnb and how you need to react fast. And it's kind of a problem that your house is getting burned, so you need to react very fast. So it reminded me that. So yeah, so let's go with the next question. So, reflecting on your tenure as director of product management, so what were the most significant challenges you faced, and how did you address them?
One of the biggest challenges has to do with how product management is implemented in various organizations. So I have been inside a company where, I owned a portfolio end to end. And then of course I've been a consultant for a while where, I come in, and whether we're talking about org structure and design or whether we're talking about delivering on a strategy, it still is part of the conversation that we have to have. So what I mean by that is I have joined organizations where product was really a delivery, like that's they were a delivery mechanism. And Marty Kagan recently wrote an article that was a pretty hot take that is very, very on point. Product management is so much more than the backlog. And I think a lot of companies, particularly large enterprises, where they were like, we have to have product management. This is a trendy thing that we have to have. All these organizations have it. Let's get it put in place. Where in reality, a lot of these companies have really just created backlog intake, backlog management, delivery, rinse, repeat. And the only people in the organization who might be applying product thinking, not that they're not capable, but they're the only ones who are empowered to do so, are so far disconnected from the product that you're going to see a lot of waste. And so to me, that's been the biggest challenge, is really making it okay for people who don't have director in their title to push back and to make investment decisions and to create the space for that. And so the way that I personally handled it when I'm in the system is I delegate, right? So part of what I make sure to do is lend credibility and lend authority to the product managers. And then hopefully the product managers are doing that with their product owners so that those folks are seen as the decision makers, with guardrails, of course, around what will and will not get built. Because the outcome of not doing that creates what I like to call escalation station. If a stakeholder comes in and they ask somebody, a product manager or product owner to do some work, and that product manager or product owner says no, that's not what we're going to do right now, we might do it later, or they just say no, it's not something that we can do, then what happens is the stakeholder gets angry, they escalate. And in organizations that do not have healthy product management, what happens then is they tattle to the leader says no, you have to do this, product person, and you completely strip all of the authority and autonomy out of it. And you end up in this cycle of, as long as the stakeholder is asking for it, they're going to get what they want. That is not product management. So that's the biggest challenge I think that I've had to navigate, because largely the people in these roles, they want to do good work, they want to do product thinking and design thinking, and to really deliver good products that are solving problems for the customer. But when they're not able to do that because of a hyper controlling organizational structure, that can be a challenge. So sometimes the biggest challenge is either saving myself from myself or saving the organization from themselves, and really pushing back on, don't be so dictatorial, empower your folks to do the right things and to make decisions, and when they make a mistake, figure out what the learning is and course correct and move on.
Yeah, yeah, it is definitely a culture that you need to set, because like it's not kind of a thing that you do once, because like these escalations will keep happening. If you like break it once, it will always happen. So you need to give this freedom and make sure that everyone will be in that mindset in the organization. So that's a great mindset, but it's really hard to find, I believe, because like before, like uh, as much as I dive deeper in my product career, like I was very surprised as well. Like when you know read all those great books about product management, you think that like everyone is doing their job by the book, but you see all those delivery machines in the product management world. It's so sad, and I really agree on that with you. So yeah, so you mentioned that like creating a strategy and you know keeping the maintaining this alignment with strategic objectives in terms of you know company level objectives and all. But there's a you know kind of a blocker to when you have set strategies or objectives, it might also hinder innovation and product thinking because you set it and sometimes you feel like you have to follow these things that you set. So how do you recommend product leaders to foster innovation within their product teams while maintaining these alignment with the strategic objectives?
That is an awesome question, and I wish more product leaders would think about it. Excuse me. When I talk about the 85-10-5 split
Mhm.
around the backlog, I also think that should happen at the portfolio layer as well. And I think that it's critical to partner with your technology folks and with your business folks on where are some opportunities for innovation and to carve out money to do that. Whether it is empowering people to I'm going to conduct this experiment. I'm going to seek, like Netflix. I think they have a really outstanding model of innovation where people are so empowered that they can just do. And part of what they have to do is seek dissent internally and externally and do some research to determine, is my hypothesis a valid one, so that I can really deliver the smallest increment to test to see whether it's a good idea. I think you have to have money set aside to be able to do that. And individuals who are in roles that have access to that money need to have you out of their way. That is ultimately, I think, the biggest challenge for a product leader is to get out of the way and create space and air cover for people to do this type of innovation. There's also a need, I think, in especially large organizations where I've spent most of my time. I think that there is a need to formalize that type of work, whether you are creating an innovation think tank where you have, some funding and seed money, and people are encouraged in that group, like they're playing, and you as a person inside the company are able to engage regularly with them if you have an idea to submit, like making sure that you have an active place that is routinely testing new things set up in your organization. I think is insanely underutilized, which is sad to me, because the amount of waste that goes into building for now, like cutting 5% of that, I think should be really easy to say, listen, we know that these things are not super high impact, but they've been requested, or whatever, right? I think that there is the ability to look at your budget and carve out a percentage of that, and create space to play in that unknown or play in the hypotheses. And so the company that I work for right now, they have something called the Innovation Operating System, or Innovation OS. And it's all about working with companies to get that set up. And what does that look like? And how do you engage? Because, of course, people are going to think that's the sexiest thing ever. I want to be a part of that. And so it formalizes a way to enable innovation. It formalizes a way to fund innovation, and then it formalizes a way to actually innovate and try and test new things. Culturally speaking, you have to be able to understand and accept that some of the things that you're doing will fail. And I'm a fan of Netflix in the way that they do things, and they call it putting sunshine on a failure. And that is the focus of the learning, right?
Mhm.
I am going to share with you what we did, and we're not just going to talk about the wins, right? We don't want an innovation operating system to be full of toxic positivity and it's only good if it's a winner. We also want to talk about here's what we did that didn't work, but these were the key learnings, and this is what we're going to do with those learnings, even if what we do with those learnings is we put them on a shelf and we walk away, right? So I think that creating money, creating space, and creating process and procedure around making sure that you dedicate to innovation is a really interesting way to play in the market that doesn't necessarily disrupt what you're doing and what you're planning on delivering with the other 95% of your budget.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also a fan of Netflix's, putting failures in show. So, great way to celebrate those failures as well. So, like we mostly talk about, prioritizing features and strategies, but sometimes we need to also sunset some existing products. So, how do you determine it is the right time to invest in innovation versus focusing on optimization or sunsetting an existing product?
Tech debt is a passion of mine as a product leader. You can do all of the product thinking perfectly, but if your technology stack isn't healthy and isn't up to date, isn't modern, then you're really going to have a hard time getting things to market quickly. You're going to have to do bigger batch sizes, right? And it just sort of erodes the product management element of it, right? It just kind of erodes that impact that it could have. And so part of what I think of as my product strategy is really that piece of it, partnering with the technology to make sure that we are capable of doing the things that we need to do quickly, that our technology stack is optimized in a way to do that. And so when we're forming that strategy and those outcomes, there should be, I don't necessarily have a strong feeling on what percentage because it's going to vary from place to place depending on how old everything is and whether you're just bolting on things to old technology or you're actually sunsetting. And so I feel like there's a little bit of a reckoning coming in that space because a lot of companies don't want to sunset things. They have these investments, they've been able to depreciate it over certain years, and there's this notion of, well, we can just continue to upgrade and update. And I think some hard conversations need to be had at the executive level to really do that. Sunsetting is just not something that you see very often unless the technology forces it. At least, in my biased, right? Everything is recency bias, of course. And in my experience, there has been strong pushback on doing that. And not from the technology side. The technologists are always the one going, why aren't you listening to me? Why aren't you hearing me? We have to do this. Or it's the product person going, if we don't enable ourselves to be nimble or to create this type of foundation for AI, for example, right? Like if we don't get our data cleaned up and do and sunset these other things, we're not going to be players soon. But I feel like you have, like, I hate to villainize finance here, but I feel like you have executives who are looking at numbers going, why should we invest in this? Where's the ROI? When sometimes it's just the cost of doing business. You have old technology, you have to replace it. And that, you know, if we want nice things, we have to pay for them. And so I think sometimes to combat that, telling the story to that finance person or to the person who's asking that question, whether it's your CTO or your CEO going, you want me to spend how much money? I think contextualizing that sunset into the story of, this is what we were doing, this is the problem that we're facing, and if we don't do this, these are the outcomes, right? We have to really illustrate the consequences of inaction. And if you don't do that, then you're going to feel the consequences of inaction, because just because you don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not there. And so I have found that getting ahead of it by partnering with the technology folks to ensure that we have tech debt remediation, we have optimization as part of our overarching plan is really a good way to get in front of certain things. And then if you are doing that and you're not getting funding or you're not getting the executive attention, I think reframing it around the consequences of inaction, and then bringing the competition to the table, or to the conversation rather, to say they're making these changes and look at the improvement that they're seeing, I think can really create the perspective around why it's important to make that kind of investment. But you do get people who are attached to their products and they don't want their baby to go away and they get
Yeah.
scared. So there's some human factor in that too that you have to navigate.
You know, we need to be a storyteller, and like if they don't really can think about the, the, maybe we need to change the language and make it something that they can understand with the like, giving them the consequences and the, the thing that they care the most. So that's a
Yeah.
great way. So when you look back at your career, and I know that you started as your early days as a senior business analyst, and now you have current leadership role in product management. How has your view on product management evolved from day one to now?
It's really all about the customer. And if you had asked Jamie of 20 years ago,
Hmm.
I would not have said that. I would have said it's all about building the stuff. And that change in perspective, I think has really been what has helped me dig in and understand that yes, the building of the stuff is very important, but it doesn't matter if you build the best thing in the world if it doesn't solve what people need solved, or if it doesn't isn't useful to people who actually need to be using it. One of the lessons that I learned during that time, I had a leader who was fantastic, and he was really a front runner. Like he was very, very had a vision, and he saw where product was going. And so part of what he did for those of us in the BA role was he really challenged us to own the relationship with the business, to own the outcomes and that sort of thing. And he created the air cover for us to screw up, and he created the air cover for me to screw up. One of the early things that we delivered at a healthcare client, um, was this functionality for people to submit authorizations for services really quickly, because at that time the only way to get authorizations for service in the United States was to make a phone call or to send a fax. Sadly, today there's even that requirement where you have to send a fax. Like it's pretty behind the times in certain spaces. And so part of what we did was we created the ability to do that, and it was a big flop. And the reason why it was a big flop is because we were not solving for the people who actually used the software. We were talking about physicians and nurses and facilities, and as opposed to the people who were really using it, which were the office folks. And so the way that we were able to get around that, and we actually got it, it ended up getting used, was I went to doctors' offices, and that's when I learned the value of actually being doing that contextual inquiry, seeing people use the software, seeing where they were having problems, seeing what like little hacks they were implementing. And once I realized, well, number one, they didn't even know that that capability existed, so we failed in making it obvious that it was there. And number two, when they found the capability, understanding some tweaks that we needed to make that feature much more attractive than picking up the phone or sending a fax. Then just by making those two changes, we had something that was getting zero traction immediately see a really meaningful decrease in our call volumes, a meaningful decrease in some paper. So it was a nice thing. I mean, it was painful at the time because I don't like making mistakes and I don't like failing. But in retrospect, it's one of the things that I'm glad that happened early in my career, because it showed me that yes, there is great success in shipping a product successfully, and that should be celebrated. But you have to listen to and measure how it's being received, and then see, what are some things that you can do differently to elevate that reception, because sometimes it's little things, sometimes it's not. But if you don't have the customer at the forefront, then you're never going to know. And so that to me was one of the most valuable lessons I learned as a business analyst, and really has shaped how I approach product management.
Yeah, yeah. Like that's great that you found like you came across such a great leader at early on your career, because like, lots of product people learning from their leaders in a very wrong way, product management. So that that means that he or she was such a great leader. So that things are changing pretty fast with AI, and they like there are great tools in the market trying to um, add value to daily works of PMs. So how do you see the role of product management evolving over the next 5 or 10 years? And what advice would you give product leaders to stay ahead of these, changes, and keep them fresh in these changes?
Get comfortable with market research. So I think I love AI. I am not one of the detractors. I'm an adopter. I think it's incredible, and I think it has a huge there's a huge opportunity even for product people to help streamline what we do and our artifacts that we create and the content of those artifacts. I think that there's a lot of help that AI can bring to the table. I think that it changes where we spend our time, especially the more tactical time that you spend. I think that is where you can leverage AI to do some of that stuff. Like you can create a first draft of a product requirements document, or you can help it, like, you know, what are the journey, what's the starting point and that sort of thing, just so you can get your first draft, and then you can spend a lot of your brain power really fleshing out and adding the creative elements, adding the nuance elements that just AI isn't capable of doing. But what that does is it really focuses you on and challenges you on, okay, if that's where AI can spend, what are the nuances that you have to play, that you have to get good at? And in my opinion, there's a big gap on how to do market research, how to do competitive research, what are some predicting and trending tools that you can use and methods that you can use, and really that outward in focus instead of doing inside out. And so I think reframing around getting really comfortable with that type of data, that type of research, that type of strategy is going to be important for product folks, because the reality is there's some level of automation that's going to come into play that might reduce, or at least give leaders the notion that they need to reduce headcount because an AI can do these certain things, when in reality you can use that time to get those individuals upskilled in the analytics piece of it and send them to be with customers more, so that they can really get comfortable not just with the macro level market, but also the people using their software and their tools and their products and services. So to me, it allows us to focus on the outside piece of it, and I think that's a big gap for a lot of product folks, and that's where I'd advise spending some time doing some upskilling, because I think that's where the product players are going to shine.
Thank you for your all answers, and giving the time to our show. I'm sure that like the product folks listening to this episode will like it a lot, because you gave us a lot of insights, real life examples, like that made me think a lot about different topics right now. So thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching and listening our episodes, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.